we're going to be talking to a guy who is the CEO and co-founder of what I think is the most exciting not-for-profit going on right now on the planet.
Yeah, I mean, they've got to be right up there. I mean, they're one of the very few not-for-profits that's ever gone through Y Combinator, which that alone blows my mind. And Brett is an incredibly impressive CEO and leader who's built a team that really could be doing anything in the tech world in high growth. You know, when I visited with them in Mexico, we visited 2 of their sites. I mean, literally they're taking families that have lived in shacks. I mean, these are like homemade tin shacks on the side of mountains that are getting washed out every time it rains.
They're having to hold their children up when the water comes running
horrible.
through.
It's horrific.
Right.
Like it's truly unimaginable conditions that rivals the worst of what I've seen in Africa. And it's in our hemisphere, right? It's really in our backyard. And they are taking those people and they are allowing them to participate in society for the first time, which is transformative.
We're talking about News Story. We're going to be talking with Brent Hagler, and it's just really exciting to watch what he's been doing, what they are now shifting into a whole new way of doing it.
Yeah, I mean, really the model that they had 3 years ago was a great model. It was a philanthropy-driven model, right? My family, we contributed resources. Yeah. They then were able to build these huge communities of homes that allow people to get out of the muck and the mire and transform their lives. That's great. The issue is that philanthropy can only take you so far when it's a global $1 trillion+ problem. That's not something that philanthropy alone can tackle. And they realized this, and to Brett and the team's credit, they said, okay, we're not going to actually achieve our goals. And so they switched models and they said, we actually need a capitalism-based, profit-based, participatory system where these people are buying their homes. We're not giving them to them.
I think it's an incredible philanthropy. I think it's incredible business. And so I'm hopeful that today, it's not just an ad for this philanthropy, although we hope people would want to get involved. I hope that, our listeners can kind of engage with how he's approaching working in a market, even creating a market and operating a company.
Yeah. I mean, and this podcast is for small and medium-sized business owners and operators. I think there's a lot to learn from what Brett's doing and how he's doing it. And I think we get into it today. I'm excited about it.
Me too. Little teaser. Some of the things that News Story has done, they partnered with a 3D printing cement company. They 3D printed homes, almost entire streets and suburbs with 3D printing. And the innovation hasn't stopped there. The point is that their mission is never changing. The methods in which they're going to have this impact, they're continually disrupting themselves. And so as we just talked about, they have a whole new model for how they're going to be approaching this. And I love how we started this conversation because we had a little, preamble where we get to know each other and we're chit-chatting and catching up. And then he just pauses like, Brent, I just want to ask you a question. Can you help me think through how to articulate what we're doing here? And it just goes from there. And I think it's a great opening. Before we dive in with Brett, they actually made a little audio clip that really explains well what they're doing and how they're doing it. I think it would help the rest of the conversation make more sense for our listeners. So let's take a listen to this News Story audio clip about what they're doing to help homelessness in the world.
Let's do it.
At News Story, we pioneer solutions to end global homelessness. Because when people own a safe home, everything changes. Health, education, and opportunities. Unfortunately, there are 1.6 billion people living without adequate shelter, and that number is expected to reach 3 billion by 2030. The problem is so big that it can't be solved by only giving away homes through charity. That traditional solution would cost trillions in philanthropy and could take hundreds of years. To end global homelessness, we have to move beyond charity. So we build more than homes. We build a housing market that works for low-income families. To build that market, we use 3 core interventions that address common causes of homelessness. 1, we develop innovations that increase the quality of homes and decrease costs for families. 2, we bridge the gap between families and providers to create housing finance products that are profitable for lenders and affordable for families. And 3, we invest in scaling up proven housing solutions so teams doing good work can reach more families. Put simply, we tackle barriers standing between vulnerable families and great housing. Rather than viewing families as charitable beneficiaries, we empower them to become participants in a market where they can afford the housing they want. Because we envision a world where every human has a fair opportunity to live in a safe home. And to build that world, we need generous partners like you. Partners who believe in building differently so others can live better, so families can take ownership of their lives, and we can all pioneer a world that feels like home.
I got one quick question for you, Brent. How would you, just putting on your not just your impact hat, but also your investor hat of how you think about things growing, how would you compare the model that you kind of first came across News Story to the model that I've been talking about today of people becoming participants and customers in the housing market? Because you were with me in the very beginning where I was talking about, remember, I was in your office and we were talking about this, and you were actually one of the ones that really helped my mind start to go, this could be our all-in future, like the thing that we do. We don't do anything else. We do this because this is the way that can have the highest leverage and can impact the most people. So I don't know, what comes to your mind when you hear some of the change that we've made and you've seen?
Yeah, I mean, I remember that moment. It was like a lightning bolt. I mean, it was a beautiful moment of like a co-creation where you and I were just, what could this be? How could this be 1,000 times bigger, 10,000 times bigger than what it is? And I remember when we were talking through it, and it for me just felt like the quiet ping of truth. Like it just felt like the thing that I think I told you, I was like, that's going to work. Like that's really going to work. And I remember you sitting there and you kind of saying, yeah, I think that's going to work. I think it's completely different. I mean, when I first got exposed to News Story, it was, hey, we take in philanthropic dollars and we try to mostly give houses away. Some people kind of pay some back. We're trying different models of kind of, pay it forward. But this idea of enabling people to be able to help themselves and take ownership and truly participate on both sides, right? So like as a person who's an active participant on the donation side and what you all are doing, I find it incredibly enriching that my dollars are then being combined with, capitalistically focused, returns focused dollars that are at massively bigger scale than they would otherwise be. As you said, this is a $15 trillion problem. Like it's not going to get there through people donating even $10 million a year. Right? I mean, that's a huge amount of money to go to any one organization. It's just not going to work. So the only way that you can do this is through the free markets. And I couldn't be more excited about that as a donor to see the reception on the other end, to be able to go to these villages that you're enacting these things actively and seeing the changes that it makes these people's lives. It is, I mean, man, I got to tell you that trip that we did to Mexico was game changing. I mean, not only because we almost died in the craziest cab ride in the history of the world.
We had a couple travel malfunctions.
We had some travel malfunctions.
Couldn't get back.
Truly, the model and the courage that you all have as a team to take something that's already working well and not protect your turf, not build your fiefdom, but to be willing to deconstruct that, and the courage to do that, just no one does that. And by the way, like no matter how this turns out, it was the right decision. And so I'm really hoping that, the builders that you have, the people who fund your organization, they may not all come along for the ride, but I got to tell you, whoever leaves, whoever will replace them in that queue, it is the right thing to get the right people behind this, because it is it's an opportunity to truly change the world. And I think a lot of not-for-profits talk about changing the world, but you actually have the ability to look back and say in 50 years, like, we actually changed the world through the model that you created. And so I just couldn't be more proud of you.
It means the world to me. Thank you.
Walk us through, I'm going to do the pun, walk us through the News story.
Man, we're about 8 years in. Started the organization with a few amazing co-founders. And let's see, I was about 25. I had just turned 25. And if somebody that knew me in high school or college or a little bit after college, if this is what I would be doing, it would literally be the last thing that they said that I would be doing. I didn't grow up going on trips to the developing world or understanding the global problems of poverty and none of that stuff. It was really throughout high school and college, just kind of all about myself. And I loved business and I loved startups and I loved learning about entrepreneurship. And so I really just wanted to be an entrepreneur. I wanted to try to build a large business, make money, all the things. And I graduate college, and I ended up starting a startup right out of college. Right around that time, I found myself I wouldn't say rock bottom. I wouldn't say, really depressed, but really just longing for a bigger purpose and a more meaningful life. I didn't know what that would be, but it just felt like a very real void, and just a kind of a feeling of not knowing what I'm worth, and all the things that I think a lot of people can probably resonate with at some point in their life. And for me, it actually happened through a revived Christian faith. And the story of how that happened for me, I was raising venture capital. It was my first time doing it. And I stumbled across a guy that I really looked up to. I had no idea about his background. He was just really a role model from afar. And I started asking him leadership questions. And I was just really, really hungry to learn. And this gentleman started talking to me about leadership, and he started talking about servant leadership. And I'm like, where does that come from? Like, what does that mean? Who taught you that? And he kind of said, well, it's from, this guy named Jesus, and he has a pretty interesting and effective leadership model. And you should, here's a couple things to learn. So for me, that was kind of what caught my attention. And from there, I made a total 180 in my life. I became a Christian. I think what happened was I still had a lot of ambition, still had a lot of drive, still had an entrepreneurial spirit. And after that happened, it kind of changed some of my worldview and my values. And that ended up leading me on a trip to Haiti. And I went down to Haiti around the time where I still had this first for-profit startup. It was an e-commerce company. On that trip, we wanted to find a charity that we could give some money back to. And on that trip, my entire world changed. I got exposed to the problem of people not having life's most basic human needs: safety, shelter, food, water, you name it, the list goes on. And that was kind of the trip and the catalyst that really sparked an idea in me, which eventually led to starting New Story. So
Brent, if you take us back to that moment, because I feel like there's a lot of people, me included, who've seen real poverty, right? Like I did, I did part of my law school in South Africa.
Yep.
Went into the shanty towns outside of Cape Town, saw just unbelievable deprivation. And honestly, it's deprivation that was similar to what we saw together in Mexico when you took me there. I feel like a lot of people see that and they don't totally reorientate their lives around solving that problem. They maybe try to help, they give, that's wonderful. But I mean, you completely changed your life. And so I guess take me back to that moment where what did you see? What was the emotional experience like? Like, how did this become the thing that you said, I want to spend really a big chunk of my life, if not the rest of my life, helping and solving?
The last thing it was forced. It was something that almost felt like it came after me, and it felt like there was a opportunity and a conviction that I just couldn't shake, that I just couldn't stop thinking about, that my mind just was restless in trying to understand and come up with solutions. And so the kind of beginning of actually starting New Story was actually not me seeing the problem and then saying, I got to start something. I got to solve this. What it led to was me trying to find other organizations, understand more about how some people were trying to address this massive, massive problem. And the more I looked from my perspective, which is not to say is right or wrong, but as a younger entrepreneur, again, that loved businesses, loved startup, all of that stuff, the more I looked, the more I just became kind of disenchanted with a more traditional style of philanthropy and charity. And so I would look at organizations that were claiming to raise a lot of money, and it was just unclear where that money was going. It felt like there was a black hole. It was very hard to understand the transparency of a model. I would look around and I would just kind of ask myself, like, why is everything so volunteer-led? Why are we not using more of the local talent and the local market, local labor, et cetera? Why is some of the branding and the marketing feel like it's 20, 30 years behind compared to some of the companies that I was inspired by and that I was learning from. And so I made this long list. Huge piece of that on that list was why it felt like there was a lack of technology and innovation and R&D. These were things that just felt pretty absent. And so I made this long list. And then by looking at that list, that literally became the reason why I thought it made sense to start something that would be kind of the antithesis of those problems. And so that's how it started. And then I kind of took a small next step and just wrote out what it could look like to found an organization with different principles and have a DNA of a pioneering spirit and challenging the status quo and just starting fresh with a vision to really do things differently, where I didn't have to be reliant on a bureaucratic board or a larger institution or none of those things. And then, one of the best things like literally that ever happened in my life trajectory, was meeting my co-founders. So one of my co-founders is Mike Arrieta. And then the other two co-founders, which have been operators with me, are Matthew Marshall and Alexandria Lafsey. And we came together and we started News Story back in 2015, and we applied to Y Combinator with about a 1% chance of getting in. And kind of against all odds, we got in and we moved out to San Francisco, Silicon Valley. And that was really when things started to take off, is when we got into Y Combinator.
Yeah, when most people think of Y Combinator, they think of high growth, high tech startups. I mean, there haven't been that many not-for-profits go through Y Combinator, correct?
Correct. Yeah, it's very rare.
So what about your application, or what about your...
Yeah, what caught their eye?
Yeah.
You had a 10-minute pitch, right? Is that how you got in it?
Some people know this, but Y Combinator is infamous for having a 10-minute final interview. And we kind of got that final interview, and there was about 300 startups that they flew in from all around the world. And it was literally a 10-minute interview. One of the kind of the maxims that we actually have at News Story to this date is to always be prepared. And so what we did is we prepared over 100 hours for that 10-minute interview. And that was just kind of an example from the beginning of how I always felt like an underdog. I was extremely unqualified comparatively to others that were there. That was an example of something that we could control, which was how much we were going to prepare for an opportunity at that time, which truly was a potential life-changing opportunity. And it's like, you got to know when you have those shots. And so I guess that's it's a little story of answering your question of what do they like. That was one thing, right? Which I think was scarce for how prepared we were, which then gave us confidence. But the other thing was just, again, what I said, like we wrote down, the whole narrative was like, this is how we believe a larger traditional organization is doing things in a way that we feel is ineffective, that we feel is too old school. And this is our vision for how to do it differently. And so we actually started with, the original model was a crowdfunding website so that people could see exactly who the family was. You could give directly to them. 100% of that donation would go towards that family. And then we really wanted to prioritize that community being built by local workers and local materials, instead of it being kind of more volunteer-led or from the outside of the country. And then we really wanted to prioritize innovation and R&D. And we gave examples of how we were going to do that. That's what happened. And we got in that first summer. Originally, our goal was to try to do 50 houses in 3 months. Y Combinator immediately doubled that goal for us and said, you guys need to figure out how to do 100 houses in 100 days. And that became a campaign that we kind of ran. And against all odds, we actually ended up doing about 106 houses in 100 days. And just to give a comparison, the Red Cross at that time, there was a bunch of articles and stuff, but they did about 6 houses during that time. It's evolved.
What about the original thesis have you kept that's the important part? And like, what of the things have you shed over time?
There's 2 main things that we've kept. We haven't changed our mission. Okay, so our mission is to pioneer solutions to end global homelessness. We have not shed our belief in the power of a home in somebody's life and their kids and growing up. We absolutely believe with all our hearts that it not only covers life's most basic needs, but it also improves somebody's education, their health, their income, and ultimately their future. And we have now data to back that up. So that hasn't changed. And kind of our founding spirit, or I would kind of say sometimes our soul as an organization, around challenging the status quo and being okay with taking calculated risk, that also hasn't gone away. It has evolved tremendously over time, and I'll explain how we did that. For us, what we've learned, we've now been at this for 8 years. We have been fortunate to partner with thousands and thousands of families now, getting access to new housing, and we actually build communities. So it's not, historically, it hasn't been one-off housing, but you could imagine like a small town with roads and services and sometimes a sports field or a market. The main thing that we've learned, to get to your question, Brent, is that the way to impact the most people, in our opinion, is not to have homes gifted, but to create a model where families can not just be reliant on becoming a charitable beneficiary, but an opportunity to become an active participant and customer in the housing market. And so for us, we have shed really the whole way that we have built housing in the past has been essentially raising philanthropy and doing our best to deliver that in a dignified, beautiful way with innovation, where families can move into a home. And that is something we're so proud of, and that is amazing. And so many people have contributed to it, and it's absolutely life-changing. But along the way, we've learned our key insight is that we can still work with that same demographic, but instead of them only being dependent on a charity, which, by the way, the supply of people that are just wanting to gift housing is less than 0.0001% of the demand of people that want housing. And so we have shed the idea that the only way to help a low-income, vulnerable family is to make sure that they get access to charity so they could have a home gifted to them. We've shed that, and we've transitioned to a model where we can create a housing market, and that they could become participants and have an opportunity to buy their home or buy their land or buy a home improvement. And that takes so much innovation to get the costs lower, to get the financing right, all of that stuff we can talk about. But where we're moving towards is really going upstream and trying to solve more of the systematic problems that have to do with the local economy and the housing market and financing and lending and a lot of things that the listener to this podcast think about in their businesses. We're trying to do that for families that historically don't really have access to something that they can afford or buy.
Yeah, I remember when we were in Mexico, a key insight that you shared with me, which it was just really a game changer for me in terms of how I thought about this, was you said we oftentimes would have a family and we'd go by and look at the house that we gave to them, and there'd be a window broken or there'd be something wrong with the house, and you'd say to them like, why didn't you fix the window? And they're like, well, it's not our house. It's your house. You gave it to us, but it's your house. It's not our house. And it was like a big light bulb moment that I think went on for you, that you had to get these people to realize that this was their house. They had to take ownership of the house. Maybe you could just talk a little bit about like when were the aha moments around that, and like how has that really driven you and the team to, in some ways, make it kind of a less, in some ways you look at like less generous model, but actually becoming more generous towards the people as humans, despite them actually buying the homes now instead of you just gifting them?
Yeah, it's something that we've been working on and piloting for years now. So this wasn't just something that we kind of said, we should do this. We've been working on it. We've had models where families have been making monthly payments for years. It was less of a formal mortgage that would come through the kind of the local market, but it was a way that we could see how families would react to it, the dignity in it, their ownership. And it turns out their repayment rates were incredibly high and very inspiring, and that people wanted the opportunity to say that they paid for their house. There was one grandmother I'll never forget was telling me that her dream is to be able to tell her granddaughter that she paid for the house, and that house was her family's for generations to come, and that there was true market value in that asset that she created. And so, yeah, that was a turning point for us, and we ultimately decided to go all in on that model because we believe, again, stewarding our mission, that is the way to actually reach and impact the most people and to create the most systematic change so that not just the generations today, but the ones coming in the future will have a better opportunity to participate in the housing market. If you just went off of the math, right? If you just said, you know what, let's just solve this with philanthropy. And I actually think there are a lot of social problems where you can do that. And that is a wise, intelligent approach. But for something as big as housing, which there's about 1.5 billion people today that don't have adequate housing, that number is supposed to grow to over 3 billion people next decade. So if you just do math on the amount of philanthropy it would take to house hundreds of millions of families, it doesn't add up. You're getting into the tens of trillions. And so if you just look about it that way, there's simply not enough supply. There's nothing close to it. It's like less than 0.0001%. And so what we believe is there is a massive, massive market of underserved households that their dream is to be able to have safe, adequate housing on land that they can own, and that there are incentives that hopefully can be profitable and have a fair margin to providers, and also, most importantly, affordable to those families that want to participate. And that's really what we do now, is we work in local markets and in these economies to create opportunities where families can participate in that local market.
How does someone enter into being helped by News Story? And maybe there's someone you can kind of walk through their story and what the process looks like and how the incentives are aligned.
David, I'll come at this with kind of two angles. The first angle is how we try to make it work in the market. And then I'll give an example of a family stories. So how we make it work in the market is there has to be an incentive for someone to, whether it's a financial service provider, bank, for them to lend to a family. There has to be incentive that is a fair, healthy margin so that they can continue doing it. And the risk profile has to be right. You can't have, obviously, too much risk in that. And if not, it becomes a one-off project, right? Which can be nice and can be good and can have an impact, but there's no growth to it. There's no scale. Same thing with a local home builder, right? That is hiring local staff and jobs. If they don't have a fair, profitable margin baked into working with this demographic, there's no incentive for them to keep doing it. It becomes a small one-off project that doesn't grow and doesn't reach as many people as we need to. So what we do is we come in and we help design lower cost products that are affordable to the families in a fair way, and then also profitable to whoever that provider is. And we are unapologetic about that because that's how we believe we can reach the most people. And so what we try to do is just simply get product market fit in that area. And that could be making sure that the cost of the house is low enough to where the family can afford it, because obviously then lending works better. And so that becomes a big part of our model. We have innovation labs. How do we work on getting the cost structure down, right? With different architecture methods, with different models that we can build, with the size of housing, whatever it might be, that is desirable to that family for where they are today. So that's the first part, is just lowering the costs. And then the second part is making sure that there is fair financing available that families can get access to, because nobody's going to be able to buy everything up front. And so you need financing. The financing has to be done in a way that there's an underwriting process, there's some market value to it. And that is what our team really works on. We work on making sure all of those incentives are aligned and that it's most importantly fair and affordable to those families. And from our experience, that's what people want. One of my favorite stories, this is a really great example. There's a family of 5. This is in El Salvador. That when we met them about 6 years ago. And it's an emotional one for me because they're one of the first families that I met. They have 2 sons and 1 daughter. The daughter is blind. And we met her when she was about 8 or 9 years old. And they lived on a very, very dangerous hill that was prone to landslides. They previously lived on a dirt floor, a kind of pieced together metal shack at best that was extremely unsafe. And I remember the daughter would have to walk up the hill every day. And it was one of kind of the most just sad moments of just realizing this is people's environments. This is what kids are born into. And they did nothing to deserve to be born there. Just like I did nothing to deserve to be born in my home with my family. And so that's a family we got to work with. They moved in to one of our first communities that we did, where families actually were paying for their house. They saved and they opted into the program. And it's about 5 years later. And when I go back there, they have built an additional 2 rooms onto their house that they did themselves. They paid for it. They have increased their income, I believe, by almost threefold by now, if not higher. And their kids are doing really well in school. And that the daughter who was blind, she's setting herself up to now have a path to go to college. And, it's not a country changing story, but that's an example on the micro level of giving someone an opportunity to actually own an asset, which is a home on land. And what comes with that is, everybody can think in their own lives. It's how your kids study. It's your health. It's your ability to start a small business and have a place where you can store your products. It's a place where you can dream, you can gather as a family. And that's what we've been able to see. And that's why I'm so inspired by our mission and our vision to reach more people.
Having seen the organization up close and seeing the level of talent you have and the level of culture is just remarkable.
What's the cultural vibe you get when you encounter it, Brent?
I would just say it's deep care, but really cutting edge technology, very switched on, hardworking, thoughtful. Like it is, if you walked into their office, you would get the same vibe as if you walked into a really tightly run, well-organized tech startup. It's a very interesting juxtaposition between what you'd see normally in sort of a not-for-profit, how not-for-profits are typically run.
Does Brett walk around barefoot?
He walks around barefoot. Yeah, he's got long flowing locks.
We have a cold plunge in our office. So that's one of the secrets.
At this point, I don't know if that's true or false. The cold plunge thing's out of control. You probably do have a cold plunge at the office, Brett.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, it seems like that as you said from the very beginning, you haven't strayed from who you are. It seems like you guys really put a flag in the ground and said, here's exactly who we are. We want to help these people. And really we're open to any way of doing that best. At Capital Camp, you said, we want to partner with people who can help us unlock this. We're open to anything, Web3, crypto, text-to-pay banking, anything that would help. How do you think about new technology? I mean, there's AI that's really come on the scene since last Capital Camp. How do you think about using technology, and how are you careful to not be too quick to adopt and waste time on things that really go nowhere versus being slow to adopt and really hurting the mission of the organization on both sides of it?
Absolutely. I'll give a couple examples. Back in 2020, after we had a very successful kind of went better than our dreams launch with our partner Icon, doing the first 3D printed house in Austin with them. And then after that, the first 3D printed community of homes that Brent got to see as well. We started getting a lot of inbound and some really exciting partnerships, opportunities to help with housing and construction. But we couldn't field all of those because we were very focused and we were trying to go down a path that we had set. And so we actually ended up incubating a venture capital fund that would be focused on early stage, high risk, high reward technology companies that do housing, construction, architecture. And so we helped start that. News Story owns the majority of the general partnership. And then we spun that out. So it's completely separated from News Story. And then one of my co-founders, Alexandria Lofsy, who is absolutely phenomenal, she now runs that fund. It's still focused on early stage housing, construction, innovation with the goal of reducing costs and housing, but it's separate from our focus. And so that's one example. And then I'll give a couple examples of very aligned innovations that we are working on and kind of explain how we got there. So I think with any innovation, it's really important to not talk about the solution and, the shininess and the exciting solution of it in the future, and to really first talk about the problem that you're trying to address and that you're trying to solve, right? So for 3D printing, we absolutely love our partner Icon. They've done a phenomenal job. The problem there, it was less about, oh, this sounds so exciting, this is amazing, let's see how this could work at scale. And it was more of, man, there's a really big problem of trying to do quality control at scale. And there's a really big problem in not seeing ways that we can decrease costs using traditional building methods. And how do you do that in a way that is still has good design and is quality and desirable? And so we really started with those problems. And then that's how we came across the amazing founders at Icon and how we got started. Another example is with payments. Obviously, AI is very exciting right now. For us, we've been working on a pilot. I can't say the name of the company, but we've been working on a pilot with AI to help families that don't have traditional credit history or a track record that others may be able to easily point to. We're working with them to help create a better credit profile for families using their phone and having AI scrape a lot of data that's already there to give them a better profile. And so that problem is, and we have so many families that seem very hardworking, where we're trying to help them build a credit profile, but they're not banked in the traditional system. They're not probably connected to a digital system either. So how do we help create a better credit profile for them? So AI would be an example there. I could kind of go on, but those are a few that we're currently working on. And we actually have a innovation lab inside of News Story that does small, very early stage pilot testing to solve problems that we believe are just, we're banging our head against the wall, are really hard problems to solve. And our team does a great job of researching what are potential companies or opportunities or innovations. How could that work with the problem that we're trying to solve? And then how do we create a small test environment, whether it's in the communities that we work with or through our partners, that we can test this innovation? So that's also a focus that we have.
Brett, you brought up you said it was Icon, the 3D printing company. Just give me a 30-second explanation of how that works. It seems so futuristic in my mind to see these little suburbs getting built out through 3D printing.
So I would say it is very futuristic. It's something that we were very lucky to be part of from the very beginning with Icon. How it works is, there's now these, literally giant 3D printing machines, and they will go and use a proprietary cement mix. And that machine has a nozzle on it, and the cement mix will ooze out of it almost like soft serve ice cream. Is how it comes out, it looks like. And it will layer a house. It'll start at the very bottom. And then depending on whatever the architecture design is of the walls and how it's all configured in the way that best suits that family or that environment. And it can be done much faster because it's robotic construction, and also quality control, which is something that we were very excited about. Is when you really think about building thousands and thousands and thousands of homes at scale, quality control becomes a significant problem. And so the hope and the promise in the future that Icon is well on their way to is that they will have better quality control at scale. The cost will be lower than the traditional way of building, and then the actual design will be more unique. And will be better suited to that household and their desire for their house. And those houses that were printed, I believe, are some of the most beautiful homes, if not the most beautiful homes that we've ever done.
One of the things I want to talk about is, as you scale the organization, everyone from the outside looks in and says, wow, the organization's really grown in size, in scale, in what you all are doing, in impact. No organization, at least from my experience, is a straight line, and there's a lot of ups and downs.
Yeah.
Maybe you can walk through, what are some of the peaks that you've experienced? Maybe one or two of the really high points you said, oh my gosh, this is going to work.
Sure.
Like, we have something here. And what were some of the points in which you said, I don't know if this is going to happen, and I don't know where we go from here. And how did you fight through those valleys?
Yeah, I mean, we've had a couple, and I'd say right now we're more in a valley or a plateau, and I can get to that. When I look back, we got off to a really good start, and it's not to say that happens to every organization. I think a lot of things went our way. We kind of got lucky in a few areas, and so our first 5 years were I mean, honestly, they exceeded my expectations and my dreams. Every year was up and to the right. I mean, we very quickly were raising tens of millions of dollars as a nonprofit, which, I mean, just by the numbers is pretty rare. We had become on Fast Company's list, one of the most innovative social impact organizations in the world, 4 out of 5 years. We had some phenomenal partnerships and brand partnerships. And so all to say, like, the first like 5-ish years was fantastic. Obviously, there were some challenges in there, but that was kind of the overall feel of the organization. And then COVID hit.
Then COVID hit.
Oh, COVID. Okay.
And then COVID hit. And it's less Brent. For us, it's less of, I mean, COVID obviously impacted every organization. It was less of COVID. What it did for us is it kind of made me and the team and our board really kind of zoom out and think, who do we really want to be when we grow up? And what is our true kind of longer term vision and strategy? And we had so many different opportunities coming at us, things from all over the world. Do you get into the US? Like, how do you scale your model? We were coming up against the challenge of scaling, where our model for the first 5 years was just getting really hard to scale. And we kind of I don't want to say hit a wall, or maybe we did hit a wall where we really didn't know the exact answer for how to take this to truly the next level. And so I'd say from 2020 to about 2022, just being really honest, we've tried a couple different things, and some of them really haven't worked. You know, we tried working closer with governments. We tried creating more technology that we thought other nonprofits could adopt and use. That was really hard. And so I think internally, it felt like there was a lot of kind of up and down and trying something, it not working, trying something again, it not working in the way that we were still delivering on our mission and impacting families, but it wasn't working in kind of this idea of having a more exponential impact, and something that could be much bigger and could grow in a way that wasn't just reliant on us going out and raising philanthropy to build houses. And then I'd say in 2022, we tried to really narrow our focus and say, from the last 7 years, what is really the one thing that we want to be fully dedicated to? And like, from my perspective, it was so important that I really wanted to basically bet the organization on. And that was going to be the model that I've been talking about, which is a market-driven model, which just means that families are able to pay for their house. And how we can do that is by working through existing businesses, local banks, local land developers, local home builders. And that was a lot different than what we've done in the past. And that's a thing that is catching traction and that we're really betting the future of the organization on. But, you know, it's been, and I've had conversations with a lot of our supporters about this. And we have a private group of about 60 families that just fund our team and our operational expenses and our R&D. It's called the Builders, which is a really cool group that's just committed to that. And, you know, I've had a lot of conversations with them about us transitioning our model and how it's different than what a lot of people signed up for. And that has been a messier transition, you know, both externally, but also internally. We've been going through, I'd say, the last 6 months. Brent mentioned that we have been fortunate to have a great culture. We have, but even the last 6 months has been a little messier internally and harder because of this transition that we're making. And so all that to say, Brent, I'm definitely feeling, and we are feeling the challenges that come with going for a model that you believe with conviction and definitely with data is the future, but you can't just snap your fingers overnight and it starts to happen. There's usually trade-offs that happen in the short term, and we're definitely feeling those right now.
Brett, I'm listening to you talk about your history there, and I'm also listening to a guy who, you know, we've hung out a couple times. Mm-hmm. And what was the experience like personally, being someone who's heading a company that you co-founded? It's just rockets for 5 years and everyone wants on board. You're kind of the new kid in town changing the world. Mm-hmm. And, you know, then all of a sudden it starts to plateau and, you know, you don't quite have the golden touch, it feels like, and you're having to solve all these messy things. Like, just what was that like? How you been dealing with that?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's interesting how the timing worked with it, because I'd say right before 2020 was kind of at the peak at the end of that first 5 years when we had just Apple TV had just done a documentary on us. I mean, it was just a lot. From a personal standpoint, I don't want to say impossible, but it's really hard to not have your identity get caught up in that. And
for sure.
And so for me, kind of at the end of that peak, I don't know what it was. I think it was probably different people speaking into my life. I am a believer, so I think there was definitely a pull to focus on this, but it was really to zoom out and get right with what's most important. And right around that time, I really tried to lean into this idea that it's not about what I achieve, but it's about who I'm becoming and my character, and kind of realizing that it's not the most important thing is not about spectacular results. It's about love for people. And then also from a faith perspective, it's more important to have obedience than to have outcomes. And so these were things that were very kind of counterintuitive to my journey from age like 24 to when I kind of made that big 180 in my life to age 30. And kind of at the end of that period is when I started to feel a lot of this. And I started to just really zoom out and talk to a lot of really wise people that had an integrity and a character that was so beyond their accomplishments and their achievements, how they cared so much if they were married, just about their wives, how they cared about the long term, how they cared about their family, how they cared about integrity for the long term. It just became very inspiring. And it's funny because it was at a really good time, because after that, there were some things that started to happen at News Story that weren't the outcomes that I had forecasted and wasn't the crazy year-over-year growth that I was used to. And it really helped me understand what's most important and to have a longer-term mindset. To think long-term is something that I'm realizing is scarce. And that's something that I've really tried to focus on, is building not just News Story for the long term, but building myself from the inside out for the long term. And that may mean or may not mean that in the short term, there may not be as big of achievements or as big of outcomes. That's to be determined. But what's most important is who I'm becoming from kind of the inside out.
I love that idea of becoming. If you could think fast forward 30 years from now and a group of your closest friends are sitting around talking about you, what is the thing that they would say about what you've become?
Yeah, I think the first thing is kind of at the very center of who I am, and the vision and the most aspirational way would be just a man whose heart desires Jesus above all else, and keeping that the main thing and that being very clear. I think if I can get that right, and if that can be the main thing, then things like integrity, humility, love, kindness, patience, generosity, those things ideally should flow from that if I'm getting that one thing right. And the other thing, Brent, I mean, I'd say just that I treated my closest neighbor, which is my wife, Demi, incredibly well.
I love that, because the other day I was really distant from my wife. I was kind of grumpy. I think I was a little angry and irritable, and I couldn't name it. And she kind of gave me a look, and it was enough of a look to me to start going a little bit self-reflective. And I was like, okay, I'm not right. And it was about a couple hours later, we were just in the car. We were actually going out to dinner with some friends, and we were talking, and I just kind of blurted out. I was like, I'm just kind of sad. And I couldn't tell you why. And she kind of looked at me, and like, it felt weird to say it, but the moment I said it, I had power over those feelings. I had the ability to kind of come out of that. And so I'm thinking through your being unashamed with things you're going through. And I just think that's so wise. And if I could just give you marriage advice being 6 months in, it's find ways to have those opportunities with your, right.
Absolutely.
Find ways to have those moments of just kind of honesty with your wife.
I think whether it's in our personal life and also in leadership roles, like with your leadership team or just with your team, to be able to, on one hand, be, whether you want to call it, be vulnerable, be authentic, whatever that means to you. But like you said, maybe you're just feeling sad, or maybe you have a lot of anxiousness in this season, right? It's the dichotomy of being able in a leadership role to be real about that, and ideally also have a kind of authentic conviction or confidence in still the main things that we need to do and where we need to go long term. And I kind of just went through that. We actually just had an exec offsite, and I opened it up saying, this is literally the most vulnerable I've ever felt as a leader. I have probably more anxiousness than I've ever had right now. Part of it has to do with the market that's obviously just happening in the beginning of April 2023, which has definitely had a disproportionate effect on News Story. And then also just with this transition that I've been talking about with our organization. So I'm feeling that in the short term, but in the long term, I actually there's this foundation of confidence and peace and hope in the long term that I actually do wholeheartedly believe in. I share that because that just happened a couple days ago.
Yeah.
I think one of the lessons that I've learned with teams and leadership is being able to do both of those. Maybe they don't always have to be back to back together, but I think it can resonate pretty well.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's interesting, this exhaustion around self-improvement or sort of like this continuous need to get better. The irony of that is that how that's best done is through vulnerability.
Exactly.
So I think it's the exact opposite. When I see a lot of the self-help gurus, it's like how to build yourself into a better person, how to do,
Right.
And I think that's where the irony, and I think that the wonderful thing that the three of us have is, we worship a crucified Savior, right? We worship someone who it looked like the darkest day, the worst day. Good Friday's coming up in 3 days.
That's
and why
right.
do we call it Good Friday? It would look like the worst day on earth. And I think it's a model for there's a resurrection on the other side of death. And so it feels like what you did with your wife the other day, what you're doing right now, Brett, and certainly what I've experienced is the more that you can be honest about where you actually are and the more that you can, almost die a series of deaths, the more there's resurrections on the other side of that really propel your life forward into a much more beautiful place than it ever could have gone by sort of being the self-made man with a chisel in your hand and trying to just chip away.
100%. That's right. And actually, it's harder to do that, right? It takes more courage to do that. The much easier thing is not to do that, right?
Right.
And I think that's what is rare and what requires courage and ultimately would have an upside on the other side of it. That's very, very well said, Brent. I couldn't agree more.
I think, Brent, too, you're someone who has modeled that for me in my life. Even doing the podcast together. I'll be sitting in a room with you, and all of a sudden you drop something about a failure, an insecurity, something with business, something personal. And all of a sudden, my whole framework of what's okay, I now have a model for. You did the first act of courage. Yeah. It's been such a model for me. And so I hope that we all can have,
it's so good.
I don't know, we can take that smaller step of courage because there's people in our lives who take the bigger step.
I appreciate you saying that. I think it's
so true.
From people like my relationship with Brett, who, the conversations he and I have had, privately.
All we do is talk about our weaknesses.
Literally, he and I went on a hike.
Literally.
I don't know, it was like a 3-hour hike. It felt like a 3-hour hike. It was so high, so hard. I don't think you sweated at all. I was drenched. Anyway, it was so hard, but the whole time, literally, he and I hiked, I would say 90% of it together. And the whole time we were talking about what we need to do better and really how to get awareness. I think a lot of it's just blind spots. The biggest challenge we have is, the world screams at you, be strong, be wealthy, be fit, be all these things. And it's like, gosh, it forces you to take all your weaknesses and try to cover them up with this glossy veneer, and then you never deal with them. And all of a sudden stuff pops up and you're like, what the hell is going on? But anyway, I appreciate you saying that, David. And Brett, just so appreciate you and the conversations we've had, and just so grateful to be able to participate. My wife and I, really, it's a huge value add to our lives that we get to participate in a very small part of what you all are doing. And I would just encourage anybody who listens to this, if you're looking for a place to really put resources with people who are doing the work, Brett never asked me to plug the organization. I'm doing this of my own volition because I truly believe in it. It is a primary outlet of my wife and I's philanthropy because we believe so much in the team, in the mission, in helping those who most need help. And I got to tell you, they are like a heat-seeking missile of goodness in that darkness. So I just really just want to say thank you, Brett, for everything you're doing. Thank you to the team. I know you stand out front and you take a lot of arrows and you get a lot of praise. There's a huge team behind you, and I've gotten the pleasure of meeting a bunch of them who are just unbelievably thoughtful, kind, generous, driven people who are really, truly trying to change the world. And I think you guys are doing a great job. No matter how the short term looks,
Sure.
I think the victory is assured.
If you want to find out more about how you can get involved or just more about what News Story is doing, go to newsstoryhomes.org. That's newsstoryhomes.org. And you can check out more. You can follow Brett on social media as well. I'm just so grateful that you've made these connections, Brent, because I think it's just so cool to see how people are having impact with innovation and with trying to live out who they want to be to help other people have a chance to live out who they want to be. Okay, we've got something exciting coming up. It's called Main Street Summit. And I just wanted to take a moment to tell people about it.
I haven't been more excited about something in a long time. I got to be honest. It's keeping me up at night. So we want to be the big umbrella collection place for small and medium-sized business owners, operators, and investors. That's the big idea. And you'd think this already exists out there. It doesn't.
I feel like I see a lot of events like this, trade shows. You can walk the floor in your suit and tie.
Yeah. Well, but there's nothing that's focused on small and medium-sized businesses. There's a lot of verticals out there, and there are small and medium-sized business events, but there's nothing that really unites the whole ecosystem. So when we think of small and medium-sized businesses, these are not necessarily the dress shop, the bagel shop, the local businesses. They might be, but those businesses at scale, right? So we want to have kind of businesses of 20 people to 500 people that are coming together and learning from each other, potentially meeting their new partners, new investors, finding talent. Like we want to be the collection point of the ecosystem that's involved in this. So there'll be some big companies that are focused on small business. There'll be a lot of small businesses that want to get bigger. The way we like to talk about it in our office is every big business started small. So every big business started somewhere on Main Street or near Main Street. And so we want Main Street Summit to be those people from around the country, around the world. And the response has been unbelievable. I mean, we've literally at this point only sent out, 2 tweets?
Like a save the date.
It was like basically a save the date.
Very basic website.
And we have 1,200 people who've raised their hand and said they want to come. So we're super excited about it. If you listen to this and you say, hey, I potentially want to come to this, reach out to us, go to mainstreetsummit.com.
Yep.
There's a sign up there. Think about participating. We're going to have lots of different verticals. We're going to have high growth verticals. We're going to have more low growth verticals by industry. We're going to have by interest. So there's going to be lots of opportunities. If you fit into the owner, operator, or investor bucket, or service providers up for those, we're going to have something for you to do. And it's in Columbia, Missouri, November 8th and 9th.
Can you give a taste of what the price point on tickets will be?
Yeah. So you're part of this discussion. We tried to make the price literally as low as we possibly could and have a shot at not losing our shirt. So, that was the goal. The goal is we want to include this big tent. We want to include everyone. We want price not to be the problem. So it's $500 for a ticket. That's as low as you can possibly get. There's no other events out there that are anything like this, a festival for $500. So we wanted to make it as low as possible. And we want people to be included.
That's great. Can you give me a taste then of what someone might experience over those 2 days when they come to Columbia, Missouri?
Think of it as, you got food and wine festivals, you got film festivals. Think of it as a festival of you're doing something intermittently through a couple days. So what we're going to have talks, interviews, presentations, workshops, all about whatever your interests are in small and medium-sized businesses. We're going to have those throughout those days. And then in between, they're going to be invited to various different things. You'll be able to kick around, create your own groups. And so it'll be really kind of, think about it as 36 hours of intense study and exploration about how to become a better owner, operator, or investor.
So that's Main Street Summit. You can go to mainstreetsummit.com. This is in November. Reserve your spot now, and we hope to see you there.
Sounds great.
This podcast is made available solely for educational purposes, and the information presented here does not constitute investment, legal, tax, or other professional advice, and should not be construed as an offering of advisory services or as a solicitation to buy, an offer to sell, or a recommendation of any securities or other financial instruments. The thoughts and opinions expressed by or through this podcast are those of the individual guests and speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views of Permanent Equity. The discussion on this podcast of any entity, product, or service does not imply endorsement thereof, and the guests of this podcast may have a financial interest, whether through investment or otherwise, in any one or more of such entities, products, or services. This podcast is presented by Permanent Equity and may not be copied, reproduced, republished, or posted in any form without its express written consent.